The transmission cut through every communication channel on Earth simultaneously. Televisions switched themselves on in the middle of the night. Radio stations went silent and then broadcast the same message. Even personal phones stopped working and displayed only one thing: an alien face with scales like dark metal and eyes that glowed red in the darkness. "People of Earth," the creature said in perfect English, somehow speaking every language at once. "I am Supreme Commander Wraith of the Draconi Empire. Your world now belongs to us. You have 72 hours to surrender completely. Resist and you will be eliminated." The transmission ended as suddenly as it began. For several seconds, the entire planet stood frozen in shock. Then the screaming started. David Hayes was in his apartment in New York when it happened. He had been a soldier once, fought in the resource wars that nearly destroyed humanity 20 years ago. Now he worked as a diplomat for the United Defense Council, spending his days in boring meetings about trade agreements and border disputes. Those problems seemed incredibly small now. His phone rang. It was Admiral Rita Okonkwo, the woman in charge of Earth's defense fleet. "Get to Geneva immediately," she said. "They want you to write the response." "Why me?" David asked, already grabbing his coat. "Because you're the only diplomat who knows what war actually looks like. We need someone who won't just roll over and beg for mercy." The flight to Geneva took 3 hours. David spent the entire time watching news coverage of the panic spreading across the world. Banks were being emptied. Highways were jammed with people trying to flee cities, though nobody knew where safety might be. Religious leaders declared it the end times. Scientists argued about whether the transmission was even real. In orbit above Earth, telescopes captured images of the alien fleet. Hundreds of ships, each one larger than anything humanity had ever built. They hung at the edge of the solar system like dark predators waiting to strike. The United Defense Council met in an underground bunker beneath Geneva. Representatives from every nation on Earth sat around a massive table, all looking terrified. David recognized most of them. He had negotiated treaties with many of these people. Now they were asking him to negotiate with aliens who had conquered 47 other star systems. "What do we tell them?" asked the representative from China, a woman named Li Wei who usually spoke with absolute confidence. Now her hands shook as she held her tablet. "We tell them yes," said someone from the European Union. "We surrender. Maybe they'll let us live. And maybe they'll enslave us," Admiral Okonkwo said. She stood at the front of the room in her military uniform, looking like she hadn't slept in days. "I've been reviewing what little intelligence we have. The Draconi don't make deals. They conquer. They take everything." David listened to them argue for an hour. Some wanted to surrender immediately. Others wanted to fight, though everyone knew Earth's military stood no chance against such overwhelming force. A few suggested trying to negotiate, offering resources or territory in exchange for survival. Finally, David stood up. "I'll write the response," he said quietly. "But I need complete authority. No committees, no revisions, no political interference. You asked me here because you trust my judgment. So trust it." The council members looked at each other nervously. The representative from the United States, a former general named Robert Chen, nodded slowly. "Agreed, but David, please, don't get us all killed." David spent the next 6 hours alone in a small room with a computer. He reviewed everything humanity knew about the Draconi Empire. They had appeared on the galactic stage 200 years ago, conquering world after world. They never negotiated. They never showed mercy. Species either surrendered or were destroyed. But something bothered David. If they were so powerful, why give Earth 72 hours? Why not just attack? He thought about his time as a soldier, about the psychology of warfare. Bullies always made threats first. They wanted fear to do half the work for them. He began typing. When he finished, David read the message 3 times. It was short, only 5 sentences. He knew it would either save humanity or doom it completely. There was no middle ground. He sent it to Admiral Okonkwo first. She called him immediately. "Are you insane?" she asked. "Probably," David said. "But I'm also right. Trust me." The message went out on every frequency humanity could broadcast. Within minutes, it reached the Draconi fleet. Within hours, it had spread across the entire galaxy through networks humanity didn't even know existed. The message read, "Supreme Commander Wraith, we have received your demand for surrender. After careful consideration, Earth's response is as follows. We decline your generous offer. However, we invite you to try taking our world by force. Attached, you will find our complete military history. Study it carefully. Humanity has been fighting wars since before we discovered fire. We have never in our entire existence surrendered to anyone. We don't plan to start now. See you soon. Attached to the message was everything. Every war humanity had ever fought. Every battle, every siege, every desperate last stand. The Mongol invasions, the world wars, the resource wars that had killed 2 billion people. Video footage of soldiers charging machine gun nests. Historical records of cities that fought to the last defender. Statistics showing that humans would rather die than submit. Across the galaxy, other species under Draconi rule received the transmission. They read it with growing hope. Some with disbelief. For 200 years, they had watched world after world surrender without a fight. Now this small blue planet was saying no. On his flagship at the edge of the solar system, Supreme Commander Wraith watched the transmission and laughed. Primitives, he said to his officers. They think their history of fighting each other means anything. We have conquered species 1,000 times more advanced. Begin the attack. But one of his advisors, an old veteran named Trell, looked worried. Commander, perhaps we should study their history more carefully. Some of these battles, silence, Wraith commanded. We move forward. Full speed. 72 hours is too generous. We attack in 24. On Earth, David stood before the United Defense Council once more. They stared at him like he had lost his mind. You invited them to attack us? Laiwi said, her voice breaking. I did, David said calmly, because now everyone in the galaxy is watching. If we surrender, we die as slaves. If we fight, we die as free people. But more importantly, every other species under Draconi control will see that resistance is possible. We won't just be fighting for Earth, we'll be fighting to show the entire galaxy that these bullies can bleed. Admiral Okonkwo stood and saluted him. Then we'd better make our last stand count. I'm mobilizing everything we have. David nodded. Through the bunker's monitors, he could see cities across Earth. People were scared, yes, but they were also preparing. Volunteers flooded military recruitment centers. Factories retooled to produce weapons. Scientists shared experimental technologies they had been developing in secret. Humanity was doing what it did best, coming together against a common enemy. The timer showed 23 hours until the Draconi fleet arrived. David knew that in less than a day, Earth would be at war with the most powerful empire in the galaxy. He also knew that Wraith had made a critical mistake. He had given humanity time to prepare. More importantly, he had underestimated what humans would do when their backs were against the wall. The wait began. Across the galaxy, billions watched their screens with growing interest. The small blue world called Earth had done something unprecedented. It had said no to the Draconi Empire. On the mining colony of Velis Prime, workers stopped their shifts to watch the human transmission. They had surrendered to the Draconi 15 years ago without firing a single shot. Their leaders had calculated that resistance meant death. Submission meant survival, even if that survival came with chains. Now these workers watched footage of human wars and whispered to each other when the overseers weren't looking. Did you see that? One miner said, pointing at a historical clip showing human soldiers in an ancient war. They fought with primitive weapons against overwhelming odds. They didn't run. Foolish, his companion replied, but his voice carried doubt. The Draconi will crush them in hours, perhaps. But at least they'll die standing up. Similar conversations happened across 47 conquered worlds. Species that had accepted Draconi rule began questioning their choices. Underground resistance movements, long dormant, started meeting again in secret. The human message had done more than declare defiance. It had planted seeds of hope. David Hayes knew none of this as he worked through the night in Geneva. He coordinated with military commanders across Earth, helping them prepare defensive strategies. The plan was simple. Make the Draconi pay for every inch of ground. Dr. James Park, Earth's leading xenobiology expert, entered the command center carrying a tablet. He looked exhausted but excited. I've been analyzing their ship designs from the telescope footage, he said. They're incredibly advanced, but I noticed something interesting. All their weapons point forward. Their ships are built for direct assault, not maneuvering combat. Meaning? Admiral Okonkwo asked. Meaning they expect enemies to either run or meet them head-on. They're not prepared for guerrilla tactics. Dr. Park pulled up a simulation. If our ships can get close, use the debris fields and asteroid belts as cover. We might inflict more damage than they expect. That's suicide, someone said. All of this is suicide, David replied. The question is how much we hurt them before we die. Every ship we destroy is one less ship attacking another world later. We're not just fighting for ourselves anymore. The global response to the impending invasion shocked everyone. Instead of panic, something else emerged: determination. Japanese engineers shared designs for kamikaze drones that could be assembled in hours. Russian factories started producing simple but effective rockets. American programmers created viruses designed to infiltrate alien computer systems. African nations mobilized ground forces trained in asymmetric warfare. Humanity had spent 10,000 years perfecting the art of killing other humans. Now all that terrible knowledge would be turned outward. In orbit, the last civilian evacuation ships departed. Families fleeing to the Mars colonies and asteroid habitats knew they might never see Earth again. Some chose to stay. Teenagers lied about their ages to join the defense forces. Elderly veterans came out of retirement to serve one last time. Artists painted murals on the sides of military bunkers showing humanity's greatest heroes. Warriors, rebels, freedom fighters from every culture and era. The Draconi fleet crossed into the inner solar system 18 hours after David's message. They moved in perfect formation, hundreds of massive warships that blotted out the stars. At their head was Wraith's flagship, a vessel 3 miles long covered in weapons. On the bridge of that flagship, Wraith reviewed tactical displays with growing irritation. "Why do they not flee?" he demanded. "Every other species ran from their homeworld when we arrived. These humans remain in position." Trell, his advisor, studied the same displays. "Commander, I've finished reviewing their historical data. These humans have fought over 15,000 documented wars. They have destroyed their own cities rather than surrender them." "They have—" "Enough," Wraith interrupted. "History doesn't matter when facing superior firepower. Open a final communication channel to Earth. Give them one last chance to submit." The transmission reached Earth's command center. Wraith's scaled face filled the screens. "Humans," he said with contempt. "Your bravado is entertaining but meaningless. This is your final opportunity. Surrender now, and some of you will be allowed to live as servants. Refuse, and we will turn your world to ash." David Hayes stepped in front of the camera to respond. He wore a simple suit, not a military uniform. He looked calm, almost relaxed. Behind him, Admiral Okonkwo and the United Defense Council stood silent. "Commander Wraith," David began, "thank you for your generous offer. I'm sure servitude is very appealing to someone like you. Unfortunately, we must decline. You see, we've been looking at your empire's history, too. 47 worlds conquered. That's impressive. But we noticed something interesting." David pulled up a chart showing Draconi expansion over 2 centuries. "You've never fought a sustained war. Every species you encountered either surrendered immediately or was destroyed within days. You've never faced prolonged resistance. You've never had to occupy a hostile population. You've never experienced what humans call a forever war." He leaned closer to the camera. "So here's what's going to happen. You're going to attack Earth. You'll probably win, at least initially. Your ships are better than ours. Your weapons more powerful. But we're going to make you bleed. We're going to destroy your ships with suicide runs. We're going to ambush your forces in asteroid fields. When you land on our planet, every city will be a fortress. Every citizen a potential threat. Every victory will cost you resources you can't afford to lose." David paused, letting his words sink in. "And the entire galaxy will be watching. They'll see that the mighty Draconi Empire can be hurt. That resistance is possible. That the cost of conquest can be too high. So go ahead, Commander. Invade Earth, we're ready." The transmission ended. Across Earth, people cheered. They knew they were probably going to die. But they would die fighting, and that mattered. Wraith stared at the blank screen in silence. Then he started laughing. "Did you hear that, Trell? They think they can make us bleed. Primitives with barely functional spacecraft think they can hurt the Draconi Empire." "Commander," Trell said carefully, "perhaps we should proceed more cautiously." "No. I want every ship in the galaxy to see what happens when you defy us. Full assault. Destroy their orbital defenses. Land troops in their major cities. Make an example of them." The Draconi fleet accelerated toward Earth. In the command bunker, alarms blared as sensors detected the incoming ships. Admiral Okonkwo activated the defense network. Thousands of satellites armed with primitive nuclear weapons. Missile platforms hidden in the asteroid belt. Every functional military spacecraft humanity possessed, even civilian ships hastily retrofitted with weapons. "All units," she broadcast. "This is Admiral Okonkwo. Today we fight not just for Earth, but for every world that dreams of freedom. Make them remember us." David watched the tactical display as red dots representing enemy ships approached the green dot of Earth. He thought about his message, about the reply that had changed everything, not because it would save humanity, but because it would inspire others. Earth would fall, but the idea of resistance would spread. His phone buzzed. A message from Dr. Park. "Weapon systems online. Drones ready. Virus packages uploaded to all attack vectors. We're as prepared as we'll ever be." Then another message, this one from an unknown source, encrypted heavily. David decoded it carefully. The message was short. "From the mining colony Velis Prime, we saw your transmission. We're done being slaves. When you strike the Draconi, we rise. Thank you for showing us courage still exists." David felt his throat tighten. More messages flooded in from across the galaxy. Conquered species preparing to rebel. Underground resistance movements activating. The Draconi Empire's subjects were rising up, inspired by Earth's defiance. "Rita," David called to Admiral Okonkwo. "It's working. The other worlds are preparing to fight." She nodded grimly. "Then we'd better make sure we give them something worth fighting for. All ships attack formation. Let's show these bastards what humanity can do." The first human ships launched from hidden positions in the asteroid belt. Outdated warships alongside converted freighters loaded with explosives. They accelerated toward the Draconi fleet on intercept courses. Wraith watched them come with amusement. "They're attacking us? With those obsolete vessels? Destroy them." The Draconi opened fire. Energy weapons cut through space. The first wave of human ships exploded in brilliant flashes, but more kept coming. And coming, wave after wave, each one carrying the same message. "We will not surrender." Trell watched the tactical display with growing concern. "Commander, they're not trying to win. They're trying to inflict maximum casualties. These are suicide attacks." "Then let them die," Wraith said. But for the first time, doubt crept into his voice. The battle for Earth had begun. The asteroid belt between Mars and Jupiter became a graveyard of ships. Human vessels, small and outdated compared to the Draconi warships, darted between spinning rocks the size of mountains. They fired missiles and then hid, waiting for the enemy to come closer before striking again. Commander Wraith had expected the battle to last hours at most. 3 days later, his fleet was still fighting through Earth's outer defenses. His tactical officers reported the same thing repeatedly. The humans refused to engage in traditional combat. They hid, ambushed, retreated, and struck again when least expected. "This is absurd," Wraith growled, watching another of his cruisers suffer damage from mines hidden in asteroid debris. "They can't win." "Why do they keep fighting?" Trell studied the battle reports with a worried expression. "Because they're not trying to win, Commander. They're trying to hurt us. Each of our ships destroyed is a victory for them, even if they lose 10 vessels in the process. Then we'll destroy them all. Continue the advance." What Wraith didn't know was that Admiral Okonkwo had divided Earth's forces into independent cells. Each group operated autonomously, hitting and running without waiting for central commands. When the Draconi destroyed one cell, others simply continued the fight. It was chaotic and costly, but effective. Lieutenant Sarah Mitchell commanded one such cell. 3 converted mining ships armed with jury-rigged weapons. Her crew consisted of volunteers, most of them civilians a week ago. They hid behind a rotating asteroid, watching a Draconi destroyer pass nearby. "Range?" Sarah asked quietly. 2,000 kilometers in closing, her navigator replied. "Wait for it." Sarah's hands gripped the control stick tightly. She had been a pilot for a cargo company before the invasion. Now she was a warrior. All power to engines, weapons hot. The Draconi ship cruised past their hiding spot. Its sensors focused forward on the main battle. Sarah punched the engines and her ship shot out from behind the asteroid like a bullet. The other 2 ships in her cell followed. They closed the distance in seconds. The Draconi vessel detected them too late. Sarah's ship fired everything. Missiles, railgun rounds, even the mining lasers that had once cut ore. The weapons tore into the destroyer's side, punching through armor that wasn't designed to defend against close-range assault. "Break off," Sarah shouted. Her ship veered away as the destroyer's weapon systems came online. Energy blasts cut through space where her ship had been seconds before. One of her companion vessels wasn't fast enough. It exploded in a ball of white fire. Sarah didn't have time to grieve. Scatter pattern beta. Meet at rally point 7. Her remaining ships dove in different directions using the asteroids as shields. Behind them, the Draconi destroyer burned, atmosphere leaking from a dozen hull breaches. This scene repeated across the belt. Human cells attacked, inflicted damage, and retreated before they could be overwhelmed. Sometimes they succeeded. Often they died. But always they made the Draconi pay. After 5 days of fighting through the asteroid belt, Wraith's fleet finally reached Earth's orbital space. He had lost 37 ships. Not a catastrophic number, but far more than he had lost in his last 10 conquests combined. His crew was exhausted, his supplies strained, and the real battle hadn't even begun. Earth's orbital defenses activated the moment the Draconi fleet came into range. Thousands of satellites released their payloads. Nuclear missiles, kinetic weapons, clouds of shrapnel designed to shred unarmored ships. The sky above Earth lit up like a second sun as weapons exchanged fire. Admiral Okonkwo coordinated from the command bunker deep beneath Geneva. She watched her forces die on the tactical display, each disappearing icon representing hundreds of lives lost. But she didn't waver. All remaining orbital platforms focus fire on their command ship. Ignore everything else. Every missile, every weapon system still functional turned toward Wraith's massive flagship. The Draconi responded with overwhelming firepower, shooting down most of the incoming ordnance, but some got through. Explosions rippled across the flagship's shields. Hull breach on deck 17, Trell reported. Shields at 70%. Commander, we should pull back and— No, Wraith snarled. All ships advance. Destroy everything in orbit. The battle raged for 12 hours. When it ended, Earth's orbital defenses were gone. Destroyed satellites and shattered platforms fell into the atmosphere, burning up as they descended. The Draconi had won, but their fleet looked battered. Ships leaked atmosphere. Entire sections of vessels were dark and lifeless. Wraith surveyed the damage and felt something he hadn't experienced in decades. Doubt. His fleet had lost another 20 ships in the orbital battle. The humans had been completely outmatched, yet they had fought with insane ferocity. Crews had piloted damaged ships into Draconi vessels rather than retreat. Weapons platforms had continued firing even as they were torn apart. Prepare landing forces, Wraith ordered. We take their major population centers. Once we hold their cities, they'll have no choice but to surrender. Trell wanted to argue but knew it was pointless. The invasion of Earth's surface began. Thousands of Draconi landing craft descended through Earth's atmosphere. They targeted major cities: New York, Beijing, London, Tokyo, Mumbai, Cairo. The plan was simple: secure the population centers, break humanity's will to fight, and force a surrender. The plan lasted approximately 20 minutes before it fell apart. The first landing craft touched down in New York, disgorging Draconi soldiers in powered armor. They expected panicked civilians, maybe scattered resistance from local police. Instead, they found a city transformed into a fortress. Skyscrapers had been reinforced and turned into strongpoints. Every window held a sniper. Streets were blocked with barriers made from cars, concrete, and debris. The civilian population hadn't evacuated. They had stayed to fight. A Draconi squad advanced down what had been Fifth Avenue. Suddenly, explosions erupted around them. Buildings collapsed, crushing soldiers under tons of rubble. Survivors found themselves under fire from every direction. Humans attacked with military weapons, hunting rifles, even homemade bombs. "This is Assault Team 9, a Draconi officer radioed. "We're taking heavy casualties. The city is completely hostile. We need—" His transmission cut off as a building detonated, taking his entire squad with it. Similar reports came from every landing zone. Beijing's defenders used the city's extensive tunnel network to attack from below. London turned the Thames into a killing zone, drowning Draconi soldiers in ambushes along the riverbanks. Tokyo's population fought with coordinated precision, having trained for invasion scenarios after watching the orbital battle. Wraith couldn't believe the reports flooding his command center. "Civilians are fighting? Where are their soldiers?" "Everywhere," Trell said grimly. "Our intelligence didn't account for total population mobilization. The humans aren't distinguishing between military and civilian targets because they've made their entire population into combatants." In New York, Sarah Mitchell had survived the orbital battle and returned to Earth before the invasion. Now she led a resistance cell in Brooklyn, coordinating attacks on Draconi positions using the same guerrilla tactics that had worked in space. Her group consisted of 20 people, former soldiers, construction workers, teachers, students. They had spent the last week preparing the neighborhood, turning familiar streets into a maze of traps and ambush points. 3-vehicle convoy moving down Atlantic Avenue, a spotter reported. Looks like supplies. Sarah checked her weapon, a military rifle taken from a destroyed Draconi transport. Team 1 hit them from the east. Team 2 block the retreat. We take the supplies and disappear before they can respond. The ambush went perfectly. Explosives disabled the lead vehicle. Gunfire from surrounding buildings cut down the guards. Sarah's teams grabbed ammunition crates and medical supplies from the convoy trucks, then vanished into the subway tunnels before Draconi reinforcements arrived. This happened hundreds of times daily in every occupied city. The Draconi couldn't hold territory because they couldn't identify the enemy. Any building might hide fighters. Any civilian might have weapons. The humans had turned their entire world into a battlefield. On his flagship, Wraith reviewed casualty reports and felt rage building. How many? He demanded. 6,000 soldiers lost in the first 3 days of ground operations, Trell replied. Another 4,000 wounded. We've occupied less than 20% of our target areas. 6,000? Wraith slammed his fist on the console. We've lost more troops in 3 days than in our last 5 conquests combined. What are they using? What weapons? Everything, Trell said. Military equipment, improvised explosives, even primitive firearms that shouldn't be effective against our armor. But they attack in coordinated groups targeting weak points. They've learned how to kill us. Wraith stared at Earth on his view screen, the blue planet now dotted with fires from ongoing battles. How is this possible? They're primitives. They should be terrified, begging for mercy. They are terrified, Trell said quietly, but they're fighting anyway. Our psychologists don't understand it. The human response to overwhelming force isn't surrender or flight. It's rage. For the first time in his military career, Wraith considered retreat. His fleet was damaged. His ground forces were dying in urban warfare they weren't trained for. The easy conquest had become a grinding nightmare. But retreat meant admitting defeat, meant showing the entire galaxy that the Draconi could be beaten. Send more troops, Wraith ordered. We will break them. But in the ruins of New York, Sarah Mitchell smiled as she cleaned her rifle. The Draconi were committed now, pouring more resources into a fight they couldn't win quickly. Every day the battle continued. Every soldier the Draconi lost was another victory for humanity. They were bleeding the Empire dry, exactly as David Hayes had promised they would. 3 weeks into the invasion, Earth's major cities were battlegrounds where progress was measured in meters, not miles. The Draconi Empire, accustomed to swift victories, found itself trapped in brutal urban warfare that consumed resources and lives at an alarming rate. In Tokyo, Draconi forces controlled the government district, but couldn't advance beyond it. Human defenders had flooded the subway system, turning underground tunnels into a network of ambush points and supply routes. Every time alien soldiers tried to expand their territory, they walked into carefully planned traps. A young woman named Yuki led one of the subway resistance cells. Before the invasion, she had been a university student studying engineering. Now she used that knowledge to build increasingly sophisticated improvised explosives. Her latest creation was a bomb disguised as debris that would detonate when Draconi scanning equipment tried to identify it. They're adapting to our tactics, her second-in-command said, a former railway worker named Hiro. Sending drones ahead, using heavier armor. Then we adapt faster, Yuki replied. She was setting up her bombs along a tunnel that Draconi patrols used regularly. They think like an empire, linear and predictable. We think like survivors. We'll always be one step ahead. That night, her trap killed 15 Draconi soldiers and destroyed 2 of their armored transports. By morning, Yuki and her cell had relocated 3 miles away through the tunnel network. Impossible to track or retaliate against. Meanwhile, in the ruins of Beijing, the battle took on a different character. The city's defenders had established a scorched earth policy, destroying anything useful before the Draconi could capture it. Power plants were demolished, water treatment facilities sabotaged, food supplies burned. Commander Wraith received reports of the destruction with mounting frustration. They're destroying their own infrastructure? Why? To deny us resources, Trell explained. They know we need to resupply our forces using local materials. By destroying everything, they force us to ship supplies from orbit, stretching our logistics to the breaking point. The strategy was working. Draconi ships had to make constant supply runs, burning fuel and exposing themselves to human attacks. The few remaining human fighters in orbit, operating from hidden bases in the asteroid belt, struck these supply convoys whenever possible. Dr. James Park worked from a secret laboratory beneath the Alps, analyzing captured Draconi technology. His team had salvaged armor from dead soldiers and studied weapons from destroyed vehicles. They discovered something crucial. The armor has a weakness, Dr. Park announced during a video conference with resistance leaders worldwide. The joints where the plates connect. They're flexible but vulnerable. A precise shot from even a primitive rifle can penetrate if you hit the right spot. This information spread through the resistance network within hours. Fighters across Earth adjusted their tactics, targeting the weak points Dr. Park had identified. Draconi casualties increased, but the humans were suffering too. Millions had died in the fighting. Cities were reduced to rubble. Refugee camps in rural areas overflowed with displaced populations. Food shortages threatened starvation in some regions. Medical supplies ran critically low. Admiral Okonkwo reviewed casualty reports in her bunker and felt the weight of every death. She had been a military officer for 30 years and thought she understood the cost of war. But this was different. This was watching her entire species fight for survival. "We can't sustain this," one of her advisors said. "The loss of life, the destruction. Maybe we should consider negotiating surrender terms." "No," said a voice from the doorway. David Hayes entered the command center, looking exhausted but determined. He had been coordinating resistance efforts from the bunker for weeks. "We stop fighting and the deaths mean nothing. We fight to the end and we give the galaxy something to remember." "Easy to say when you're not the one sending people to die," the advisor shot back. David's expression hardened. "I wrote the message that started this war. Every person who dies because I challenged the Draconi. You think I don't feel that weight? But surrendering now doesn't save lives. It just makes us slaves who watched our world burn before we gave up." The argument was interrupted by an urgent communication. It came from outside Earth, encrypted heavily. Admiral Okonkwo decoded it and her eyes widened. "It's from Velis Prime, the mining colony that sent us that first message. They've rebelled." The news spread quickly through Earth's resistance network. Velis Prime wasn't the only world rising up. 3 other Draconi-controlled planets had begun their own rebellions. Inspired by Earth's continued defiance, the Draconi Empire was fighting on multiple fronts for the first time in its history. Wraith received the reports in his damaged flagship and felt his carefully constructed empire beginning to crack. "How many worlds are in active rebellion?" "4 confirmed, Commander," Trell reported. "And we're receiving intelligence of unrest on 6 others. The humans broadcast their resistance across the entire galactic network. Other species are watching and deciding they'd rather die fighting than live under our rule." "Then we crush them all," Wraith said. "I want forces diverted to these rebellious worlds immediately. Commander, we can barely hold our positions on Earth. If we divide our fleet, do it." Wraith roared. "I will not allow primitives to destroy everything we've built. Earth started this. Earth will be an example of what happens when you defy the Draconi Empire." He ordered total warfare. No more attempts at occupation. Earth would be burned until nothing remained. Orbital bombardment would continue until the planet was lifeless. Only then would the galaxy understand the price of resistance. When the bombardment began, it was devastating. Energy weapons fired from orbit turned forests into ash. Coastal cities disappeared under tidal waves created by projectiles dropped into the oceans. Entire regions became uninhabitable wastelands, but even facing annihilation, the humans didn't surrender. They retreated into underground facilities built during the resource wars, vast bunker networks designed to shelter populations during nuclear conflict. From these hidden bases, they continued to fight, launching missiles and coordinating resistance attacks. Sarah Mitchell found herself commanding a larger force now, nearly 200 fighters operating in the ruins of New York. The city above them was gone, reduced to radioactive rubble by orbital strikes, but beneath the destruction, the subway system and emergency bunkers still functioned. "We got a message from Geneva," one of her communications officers said. David Hayes is organizing something called Operation Last Light. He's asking for volunteers. Sarah read the message carefully. Operation Last Light was insane, suicidal. It involved loading every remaining spacecraft, including civilian vessels with nuclear weapons, and launching a coordinated strike at the Draconi fleet. The chances of success were minimal. The chances of survival were zero. I'm going, Sarah said immediately. But you're needed here commanding the ground resistance. Someone else can command. This is more important. She looked at her fighters, people she had fought beside for weeks. David's message started this war. If he says this is how we end it, I believe him. Who's coming with me? Every hand went up. Similar scenes played out in resistance cells across Earth. Thousands of volunteers stepped forward, knowing they were signing their own death warrants. Pilots, soldiers, engineers, even civilians who had never flown spacecraft before, all willing to die if it meant striking a final blow against the Draconi. The ships assembled at secret launch facilities hidden across the globe. Ancient warships pulled from military museums, civilian cargo haulers, personal spacecraft owned by wealthy colonists who had fled to Mars and donated their vessels to the cause. Each ship was loaded with every nuclear weapon humanity could spare. David Hayes would lead the attack himself, piloting a retrofitted shuttle that had once carried tourists to observe the moon. He addressed the volunteer fleet in a final transmission before launch. Everyone listening to this knows we're probably going to die today, David said quietly. The Draconi fleet is damaged but still powerful. Our ships are outdated and barely armed. By every rational calculation, we should lose. But humanity has never been particularly rational. We're the species that invented the concept of a last stand. We're the people who fight hardest when there's no hope left. Today we show the galaxy what that means. He paused, looking into the camera with absolute conviction. This isn't just about Earth anymore. 4 worlds have rebelled because they saw us refuse to surrender. More will follow. The Draconi Empire is crumbling because we had the audacity to say no. When we die today, and we probably will, the galaxy will remember us. They'll remember that humans looked at the most powerful empire in existence and decided it wasn't good enough to rule us. So let's make this count. Let's make them bleed so badly that every conquered world sees that resistance is possible. See you on the other side. The fleet launched from Earth in waves, over 3,000 ships rising from hidden facilities. They were humanity's last military asset, everything that remained after weeks of brutal warfare. Wraith's sensors detected them immediately. The humans are launching an attack, Trell reported, sounding almost sad. 3,000 vessels, most of them civilian craft. This is suicide. Then we'll grant them their wish, Wraith said. All weapons target the approaching fleet. Destroy them all. The Draconi fleet opened fire. Energy weapons cut through space, destroying human ships by the dozens. But the fleet kept coming, pouring through the defensive fire like a swarm. They weren't trying to dodge or defend. They were just pushing forward, every ship on a direct course for Wraith's flagship. Sarah Mitchell piloted her converted mining vessel through the maelstrom of fire. Ships exploded around her in brilliant flashes. She saw friends die, people she had fought beside in the ruins of New York. But she didn't slow down. Her ship carried enough nuclear weapons to level a continent. If she could get close enough to the Draconi flagship, she could detonate them all. The distance closed. 1,000 ships became 500. 500 became 200. The survivors were point-blank range now, too close for the Draconi's long-range weapons to track effectively. They crashed into the enemy fleet like a tidal wave of fire and fury. Sarah's ship took a direct hit that tore off half the hull. Alarms screamed as atmosphere vented into space. She had seconds left. Ahead, through the shattered viewport, she could see Wraith's flagship looming like a dark mountain. She thought about Earth burning below her, about the billions who had died, about the species across the galaxy watching this moment. Then she activated the detonation sequence and smiled. The nuclear explosions began. The explosions created a chain reaction that lit up Earth's orbit like a miniature star. Nuclear weapons detonated in succession as human ships crashed into Draconi vessels or triggered their payloads at point-blank range. The energy released was equivalent to every nuclear weapon humanity had ever tested, all going off simultaneously in the span of 3 minutes. On the surface of Earth, in the bunkers and underground shelters, the survivors watched the sky turn white. Even through layers of rock and reinforced concrete, they felt the shockwave. Then everything went silent as the electromagnetic pulse knocked out most remaining electronics. Admiral Okonkwo's command center lost power for 20 seconds. When the backup generators kicked in, the tactical display showed chaos. The overlay of ships and positions was gone, replaced by static and error messages. Her communications officer worked frantically to restore sensors. "I'm getting readings," the officer said. "Partial at best, but something's coming through." The image that resolved on the main screen made everyone in the command center gasp. The Draconi fleet was shattered. Dozens of ships had been completely destroyed. Others drifted in pieces, venting atmosphere and burning. At the center of the destruction, Wraith's flagship hung dark and lifeless, its hull breached in hundreds of places. "Did we do that?" someone whispered. "We did," Admiral Okonkwo said, her voice thick with emotion. 3,000 ships, 3,000 crews. They're all gone, but they took the Draconi fleet with them. Not quite all. A few human ships had survived the attack by sheer luck, damaged beyond repair but intact enough to transmit. One of those transmissions reached Earth's command center, audio only, filled with static. "This is Shuttle 734, a voice said, broken by interference. "We're adrift. Life support failing. But we got them. Tell Earth. Tell everyone watching. We got them." The transmission cut off. Admiral Okonkwo closed her eyes, fighting tears. Thousands dead in a single battle, but they had broken the Draconi fleet. They had proven that the Empire could bleed. On Wraith's flagship, emergency lights cast everything in red. The bridge was a disaster of broken equipment and injured crew. Wraith himself had been thrown from his command chair during the explosions. One leg broken, burns covering his scaled skin. Trell helped his commander stand. "We need to evacuate. The ship is dying." "No," Wraith said through gritted teeth. "We hold position. Signal the surviving ships to regroup. We can still salvage this. Commander, we lost 63 vessels. The fleet is broken. We have no choice but to retreat." Wraith grabbed Trell by the uniform. "If we retreat, the entire galaxy sees that primitives defeated the Draconi Empire. Do you understand what that means? Every world we conquered will rebel. Everything we built will collapse." "It's collapsing already," Trell said quietly. He pulled up a data pad showing reports from across the Empire. 7 worlds in open rebellion now. Our garrison forces are spread too thin. The human resistance broadcast their attack across every frequency. The entire galaxy watched them sacrifice thousands of ships to hurt us. They're calling it the most heroic military action in recorded history. Wraith stared at the reports, watching his empire crumble in real time. The humans had done exactly what they promised. They had made resistance costly, but they had also made it inspirational. Species that had submitted without a fight now questioned why they had been so afraid. On Velis Prime, the mining colony that had first sent Earth a message of support, rebels had captured the orbital defense platforms. They broadcast images of Draconi soldiers surrendering, of colonists tearing down Empire flags and replacing them with symbols of freedom. On other worlds, similar scenes played out. The Draconi Empire had maintained control through fear and overwhelming force. But Earth had shown that even overwhelming force could be resisted. That fear could be overcome. That sacrifice in the name of freedom meant something. In an underground medical facility beneath what used to be London, Dr. James Park worked on wounded resistance fighters. The facility was overwhelmed with casualties from the orbital bombardment and the fighting that continued in the ruins above. He had been operating for 16 hours straight, saving who he could. A communication came through on the emergency network. "Dr. Park, this is Geneva Command. We need you to make a statement. The galaxy is watching. They need to hear from someone on the ground." Park looked around the blood-stained medical bay at the wounded and dying. "What do you want me to say?" "Tell them the truth. Tell them what the cost has been." Park stepped in front of a camera, still wearing his surgical gown covered in blood. He was exhausted, his hands shaking from fatigue, but his voice was steady when he spoke. "My name is Dr. James Park. I'm speaking from Earth, from a facility treating wounded resistance fighters. I want the galaxy to know what this war has cost us. We estimate 60% of Earth's population is dead or dying. Our cities are ruins, our forests burned, our oceans poisoned. By any measure, we've lost." He paused, looking directly into the camera. "But we're still here, still fighting. Because some things are worth more than survival. Freedom is worth more than comfort. Dignity is worth more than safety. The Draconi offered us a choice: surrender and live as slaves, or resist and die as free people. We chose death. And in choosing death, we found something worth living for. We found the strength to stand up and say no. Park's message spread across the galaxy within hours. It was translated into thousands of languages, broadcast on every free network. The image of a doctor covered in blood, speaking about the price of freedom while people died around him, became a symbol of resistance. What remained of the Draconi fleet began withdrawing from Earth orbit. Wraith had no choice. His ships were too damaged to continue the bombardment. His ground forces were trapped in urban warfare they couldn't win. And reports kept coming in of more worlds rebelling, more of his empire fracturing. Begin evacuation of ground forces, Wraith ordered. Full retreat to the outer system. We regroup and return with reinforcements. But even as he gave the order, Wraith knew the truth. There would be no reinforcements. The empire was collapsing. Garrison fleets across 47 worlds were being pulled back to defend against rebellions. Ships that should have been conquering new territory were instead trying to hold together an empire tearing itself apart. The Draconi soldiers on Earth's surface received retreat orders and tried to evacuate, but the human resistance wasn't letting them go easily. Every evacuation point came under attack. Landing craft were destroyed before they could lift off. Soldiers trying to reach extraction points were ambushed in the ruins. Yuki and her resistance cell in Tokyo tracked a Draconi evacuation convoy heading for a landing zone. They're running, Hiro said with satisfaction. After everything they did, they're actually running. Then we make sure they remember why they ran, Yuki replied. She triggered the explosives her team had planted along the convoy's route. The street erupted in fire, destroying half the vehicles. Across Earth, similar attacks decimated the retreating Draconi forces. Of the 60,000 soldiers who had landed during the invasion, less than 20,000 made it back to their ships. The rest died in the ruins they had helped create. Admiral Okonkwo watched the alien fleet withdraw from Earth orbit and allowed herself one moment of relief. They had survived. Barely. Earth was a devastated wasteland that would take decades to rebuild. But they had survived, and more importantly, they had won. Send a message to all remaining resistance cells, she ordered. The Draconi are retreating. Hold fire and let them go. We've bled them enough. But some didn't get the message in time or chose to ignore it. Sarah Mitchell had survived Operation Last Light by pure chance. Her ship had been knocked off course by an explosion, sending her tumbling away from the main battle. She had watched the rest of the fleet die while her damaged vessel drifted helplessly. Now, days later, a salvage crew had retrieved her ship and brought her back to Earth. She was in a hospital bed, recovering from injuries and radiation exposure, when she learned that David Hayes hadn't survived. He had been on one of the first ships to reach the Draconi flagship, triggering his payload directly against the hull. He died the way he wanted, Admiral Okonkwo told her, making them pay. Sarah thought about the diplomat who had started this war with a simple message. The man who had refused to surrender and instead invited the Draconi to try taking Earth. His death should have felt meaningless in the face of so much destruction. Instead, it felt like purpose fulfilled. We need to tell his story, Sarah said. We need to make sure the galaxy knows what he did, what all of them did. We will, Admiral Okonkwo promised. But first we need to survive. Earth is barely habitable. We have millions of wounded, refugees, people who need food and shelter. Can you help with that? Sarah pushed herself out of the hospital bed, ignoring the pain from her injuries. I can help. What do you need? In orbit, the last Draconi ships disappeared, jumping to faster-than-light travel. They left behind a broken world, but also something unexpected: hope. Earth had faced impossible odds and survived. They had inspired a galaxy of conquered species to rise up and fight. The Draconi Empire would spend the next year trying to hold itself together as rebellions spread from world to world. Some would be crushed. Others would succeed in achieving independence. But all of them traced their inspiration back to a small blue planet that had refused to surrender. Wraith sat in his damaged flagship, jumping through space toward what remained of his empire, and thought about the human diplomat's message. We invite you to try, David Hayes had said, and Wraith had tried. He had brought the full might of the empire against one primitive world, and he had lost everything. 10 years after the Draconi fleet retreated from Earth, the galaxy looked completely different. The empire that had conquered 47 worlds over 2 centuries had collapsed in less than a year. Former subject species had risen up, inspired by humanity's resistance, and torn the Draconi power structure apart. Earth itself remained scarred. Vast regions were still radioactive wastelands. Cities existed as rebuilt settlements among ruins, constructed from the debris of the old world. The population had stabilized at about 2 billion, recovering slowly from the losses of the war. But the planet lived, and its people had learned to thrive in the harsh reality they had created. Sarah Mitchell stood at a memorial on the outskirts of rebuilt New York. The monument was simple, a wall of black stone carved with names, millions of names. Every human who had died during the invasion. Near the top she found the one she was looking for. David Hayes, diplomat, soldier, hero. Still coming here? A voice asked behind her. She turned to see Admiral Okonkwo, older now but still strong, walking with a cane after injuries from the war. Every year, Sarah replied. Seems appropriate. This is where it all started, really. David's message from this city changed everything. Changed everything, Okonkwo repeated thoughtfully. Did it, though? Sometimes I wonder if we just broke one empire to create chaos in its place. Sarah shook her head. We gave the galaxy a choice. That's more than they had before, it was true. The vacuum left by the Draconi collapse had created a period of instability, but also opportunity. Former subject worlds formed alliances, creating coalitions based on mutual protection rather than conquest. Trade networks flourished without empire tariffs and restrictions. New technologies spread freely as species shared knowledge instead of hoarding it. Earth had become an unexpected center of this new order. Not through military might, which they no longer possessed, but through reputation. The species that had fought the Draconi to a standstill commanded respect. When disputes arose between worlds, they often requested human mediators. When new threats emerged, they asked Earth for strategic advice. Sarah now served in the Interstellar Defense Coalition, a voluntary alliance of 32 worlds committed to mutual protection. Her role was training other species in the guerrilla warfare tactics that had proven so effective against the Draconi. She taught them what humanity had learned at terrible cost, that determination could overcome superior technology, that resistance was always possible, and that freedom was worth any sacrifice. We have a situation, Okonkwo said, pulling up a data pad. Wraith has requested a meeting. Sarah's expression hardened at the name. The former Draconi Supreme Commander had been living in exile for 10 years, stripped of power and authority. The empire he had led no longer existed. Most of his former subjects wanted him dead. A few worlds had issued execution warrants, but humanity, surprisingly, had granted him asylum. Why would we meet with him? Sarah asked. Because he claims to have information about a new threat, something emerging from beyond known space. He says we need to hear what he knows. The meeting took place on a neutral space station orbiting between Earth and Mars. Sarah attended as Earth's military representative, accompanied by delegates from a dozen other worlds. They assembled in a conference room and waited. Wraith entered slowly. He looked nothing like the proud warrior who had demanded Earth's surrender a decade ago. His scales had dulled with age. He walked with difficulty, old injuries never properly healed. His eyes, once fierce and confident, now held only weariness. Thank you for seeing me, Wraith said, his voice rough. He sat across from the assembled delegates, looking at each of them. I know most of you would prefer me dead. I have earned that preference. But what I have to tell you is more important than my life or your justified anger. He activated a holographic display showing a region of space beyond the former Draconi territory. For the past 3 years, I have been tracking unusual signals from this sector. Ships disappearing. Colonies going silent. At first, I thought it was just the chaos following my empire's collapse. But the pattern is too consistent. Something is out there and it's expanding toward our space. Sarah studied the display skeptically. Why bring this to us? Why not investigate yourself? Because I have no ships, no resources, and no authority, Wraith said bluntly. The empire I built is gone. All I have left is knowledge and experience. I'm offering both, not because I seek redemption, but because what's coming might be worse than anything the Draconi ever did. The delegates discussed this in private for an hour. Opinion was divided. Some thought Wraith was manipulating them, seeking relevance or attempting to rebuild his power. Others believed the threat might be real and deserved investigation. Finally, Sarah made the decision. We'll send a scout fleet to investigate. But you're not coming with us. You stay here under guard until we verify your information. Wraith nodded slowly. That's fair. But may I ask you something, Captain Mitchell? What? Do you think it was worth it? Everything Earth sacrificed, all the lives lost. Was it worth the cost? Sarah thought about the question carefully. She thought about David Hayes and the 3,000 ships of Operation Last Light, about the billions who had died in the bombardment, about the ruined cities and poisoned land. Every single death, she said finally. Yes, it was worth it. Because we're free. Our children will grow up free, and every species in this coalition is free because we showed them it was possible. So yes, Supreme Commander, it was absolutely worth it. Wraith looked away, something like shame crossing his features. I wish I had understood that before it was too late. The investigation of the unknown threat took 3 months. Scout ships from the coalition explored the sector Wraith had identified and confirmed his suspicions. Something was there, a new power expanding through space, absorbing or destroying everything in its path. Unlike the Draconi, this threat didn't conquer. It simply consumed. Earth scientists worked with researchers from across the coalition to analyze the data. Dr. James Park, now elderly but still brilliant, led the research effort. His conclusion was grim. The approaching threat made the Draconi Empire look insignificant by comparison. We're calling them the Harvesters, Dr. Park explained in a briefing to coalition leadership. They appear to be autonomous machines, possibly left over from some ancient civilization. They strip entire star systems of resources, then move on. They don't negotiate, don't communicate, don't stop. And they're heading in our direction. The news sent shockwaves through the coalition. Some worlds wanted to flee, abandon their systems and run. Others prepared for war. Earth predictably chose to fight. Sarah found herself leading the military planning committee. She brought together strategists from 30 worlds, each contributing their unique perspectives and capabilities. The coalition had something the Draconi Empire never possessed: genuine cooperation. Species worked together not out of fear, but because they shared a common cause. We learned from fighting the Draconi, Sarah told the assembled commanders. Superior technology can be overcome with proper tactics. The Harvesters might be advanced, but they're machines. They follow patterns, algorithms. We can exploit that. Over 6 months, the coalition built a defense network unlike anything the galaxy had seen. Not a massive fleet like the Draconi used, but a distributed system of mobile platforms, minefields, and autonomous weapons. Each world contributed what they could: manufacturing capability, raw materials, scientific expertise, or warriors. Humanity's contribution was strategic planning and something else: the willingness to sacrifice. When the defense network needed someone to pilot suicide ships against the Harvesters, humans volunteered first. Not because they wanted to die, but because they had proven they would if necessary. The Harvesters arrived at the Coalition's outer territories 2 years after Wraith's warning. The first battles were devastating. The machines were indeed advanced beyond anything the Coalition possessed. But Sarah's strategies worked. Distributed attacks prevented the Harvesters from concentrating their forces. Guerrilla tactics wore them down. Sacrificial strikes damaged critical systems. The war against the Harvesters lasted 5 years and cost millions of lives across the Coalition. But unlike the Draconi invasion, this time Earth didn't fight alone. 32 worlds stood together, supporting each other, sharing the burden of defense. When the last Harvester was finally destroyed, the victory belonged to everyone. Sarah attended a memorial ceremony on Velis Prime, the mining colony that had first supported Earth's rebellion. A monument stood there now, listing the names of colonists who had died fighting both the Draconi and the Harvesters. At the top of the monument was an inscription in multiple languages: inspired by Earth, freed by courage, united in purpose. A young colonist approached Sarah after the ceremony, a girl no more than 15. "Is it true you fought in the Draconi War?" she asked. "I did," Sarah replied. "My teacher says that war changed everything, that humans showed the galaxy how to fight back. Is that true?" Sarah thought about David Hayes and his simple message, about Admiral Okonkwo coordinating the defense, about Dr. Park healing the wounded, about 3,000 ships charging into certain death, about billions who had refused to surrender. It wasn't just human, Sarah said carefully. It was the idea that resistance is possible, that freedom matters more than survival. We showed the galaxy that yes, but then you all proved it was true by fighting for your own freedom. That's what changed everything. Years later, historians across the coalition would debate which moment truly defined the new galactic order. Some pointed to David Hayes's reply to the Draconi surrender demand. Others emphasized Operation Last Light Sacrifice. A few argued the real turning point was the coalition's victory over the Harvesters, but most agreed on something simpler. The galaxy changed when one species refused to accept the way things had always been. When humans looked at overwhelming force and said no. When they invited the most powerful empire in existence to try taking their world, knowing they would probably die but fighting anyway. On Earth, now rebuilt and thriving, schools taught children about the war. Not to glorify violence, but to remember the principle their ancestors had died defending. Freedom has a cost. Resistance is possible. Some things are worth any sacrifice. Wraith spent his final years on Earth, studying human history and culture. He wrote a book about the war from his perspective, titled The Species That Said No. In it, he tried to explain what he had learned too late. I brought the might of an empire against Earth expecting them to surrender, he wrote in the conclusion. Instead, they invited me to try. Those 4 words destroyed everything I had built, not because humans were stronger, but because they were willing to pay any price for freedom. I learned too late that you cannot conquer a people who value freedom more than life itself. You can only destroy them, and in doing so, you destroy yourself. The book became required reading in coalition military academies. Sarah Mitchell lived to see Earth fully recovered. The scars of war finally healed. She watched new generations grow up in a galaxy where freedom was the norm, not the exception, where species cooperated as equals rather than bowing to imperial authority. On her deathbed, surrounded by friends from a dozen worlds, someone asked her if she had any regrets about the war. Only one, she said quietly, that David Hayes didn't live to see what his message created. He invited the Draconi to try taking Earth. They tried. They failed. And in failing, they showed the galaxy that tyranny always has a weakness. It can't survive contact with people willing to die rather than submit. She closed her eyes, remembering the day she had watched David's ship charge into the Draconi fleet, remembering his final words broadcast across the galaxy. This is what happens when you pick a fight with Earth. The galaxy had learned that lesson well. 47 freed worlds, a thriving coalition, genuine peace built on mutual respect rather than conquest, all of it traced back to a simple reply to a surrender demand. The reply that changed everything.